How much do you think MrBeast charges per video for his ad sponsorships? Or what is the worst deal that he's ever made? And what is the major unlock that helped him reach almost what, 500 million plus subscribers today? Here are 18 slides of the 200 slide deck that I reviewed that is part of the ongoing lawsuit. So it's essentially became publicly available. And I extracted some of the more interesting commercial details that do not touch necessarily Feastables just yet, with except of one small piece, but we're going to talk about that in the future videos. For now, the first one I wanted to highlight is what is the goal for someone who already has the most amount of subscribers globally, right? Like 500 million now and plus subscribers on the YouTube channel. And really the path is towards 1 billion. So this is the goal that the team is essentially setting before themselves. It's a cumulative, right, across all the channels. And as you can see, the data is a little bit outdated, although the court filings happened about a month ago. The deck itself, I think, is from 2024, if I recall correctly. So, or like middle of 2024. So some of the data will be outdated. But it's just interesting to see kind of like this is what they're striving to achieve, right? This is the goal right now, hitting this amount of followers, which is interesting because to me, I was like, it kind of answers my question. What are they really trying to work on? And how they're getting there is kind of like the first thing I wanted to stop, which is like this big unlock that they've had around the dubbing. As you can see, MrBeast channel is top channel based on the views across multiple different languages already, right? So they're calling out 9 languages, including Thai over here. And they're top 5 for another 5 languages. And to me, this is one of the major unlocks for any creator. From the very beginning, when they start experimenting on YouTube, being the ability to give they were giving us the ability to apply essentially different audio tracks to our video in different languages. To me, that was like one of the most exciting things ever. And obviously with the AI translations right now and the quality improving, you can achieve this kind of success as a creator thanks to the fact that you're no longer just bound by the language that you speak, which I think is awesome. It gives us an opportunity to see other international creators, and for other creators who may not necessarily speak the language, go and consume our content. I think this is cool, and you can see it. And this is kind of like the continued extension back then. So it's about 2 years ago. They already been really focused on talking about, okay, how do we go through and pretty much cover as many languages as possible to make sure we get the access to all of those audiences. And we're going to talk about what the pluses and the minuses are of this approach in terms of like the growth of the audience. But at least from a dubbing perspective, you can see it's very strategic. They thought about all the top languages with the most amount of speakers globally, and they're slowly expanding to further and further kind of like through this stack of languages. And speaking of AI, they absolutely were going with AI, but what I appreciate about it is that they were testing it, right? So this is essentially the slide that covers the fact that instead of just going, rushly and say like, okay, this is the tool, it's going to translate for us, it's all going to work well, we're going to just do it across the board. No, they actually selected number of shorts. They decided, okay, we're going to translate them, we're going to put them out there, we're going to compare their performance against the same language content in the past, other pieces of content, just to see how it tracks. And I think it's kind of like pretty cool and nice and very kind of like, I think, smart approach when it comes to how do you go about producing the content in different languages using this dubbing feature and using the AI technology. So I think this was awesome. When it comes to, if we just now scroll to the actual revenue side, this was an interesting insight in terms of, let's start with just specific the top line numbers, because this is pretty impressive. And I'm kind of like skipping some of the other visuals. Let me know if you would want to talk through them as well, because there are like top lines there, how much I'm making, we're going to get to it. This was an interesting analysis that clearly his team was conducting around how many videos do they need to produce per quarter to essentially break even or at least start making profit, right? Because as you can see, if they're only publishing about 3 to 6 videos per quarter, right? So what, it makes it once a month, twice a month, right? Like every 2 weeks. They're losing money based on their total expenses, based on the potential revenue that they gain between the YouTube, the sponsorships, probably merch, and the other things that they're going to promote, versus if they start hitting this almost like a weekly cadence, right? So over here, they're 9 is about weekly cadence, right? It's about 3 per month. They're really starting to make actual money and make profit, which is fascinating to me from the perspective of like, this is the scale that we're talking about. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars in expenses, in the need to stay on this like treadmill and kind of like continue to produce interesting, exciting content almost every week at that scale, at MrBeast scale. This is where they need to be in order to be profitable on the media side of things, right? But then if you start factoring in, obviously, kind of like some of the other revenue sources, and this is the more interesting one that I wanted to kind of like zoom in over here, was really the Feastable side of things, right? And again, this is kind of like their flow between, I think it's all actual. Yeah, it's consolidated and it's all actuals, because sometimes they throw in like projections, and projections can look amazing. They're like projections for the Feastables, and it's for the future video are to hit like billion plus pretty much this year. But as you can see, in terms of like the revenue, this is substantial, right? In a single quarter, making $60 million off of this business, it's pretty impressive. And you can see how it now outgrows, right? Even at this scale, it already outgrows the branding deals or the YouTube kind of like sponsorship deals. And Spotter, we're also going to talk about it in a second, right? Specifically, if you zoom in on the content side, you can kind of like see the breakdown, but it's really impressive to me. And this is kind of like one of those takeaways from the perspective of the costs of like, hey, yeah, the costs are massive, but also their revenue opportunities seem to be growing pretty well as well. And that segues us nicely into the conversation of the costs of actual specific videos and the brand partnerships, which is, I think, an interesting insight into MrBeast's world. This was a breakdown of then videos in terms of like how much they spent on some of these videos, and it's kind of crazy. Like the remaining in the wilderness video or the bunker video, almost $4 million. It was a fun video, but it's crazy to see. And it's interesting also to see that some of the other ones, it's kind of like on the lower end, but again, some of them are either promotional, like a Teen Wells, or the shorts, right? From what I understand, again, not an expert on every single piece of MrBeast content, but you can see this is kind of like an interesting breakdown. And the very interesting one is also the fact that they spent that year, it's first half of 2024, $5 million on the videos that they scrapped completely, which is kind of crazy. Again, that's the scale and that's the attention, right, to details in terms of they want to make sure they put out only bangers, which means you're going to be spending quite a bit of money on ideas and stuff that might never see the light of day unless you do some sort of compilation like sometimes MrBeast does to showcase some of the videos that never worked out, right? So pretty impressive. And the breakdown is also interesting because I think from a financial perspective, that's where you start seeing like a little bit of that corporate world entering here, because they're pretty smartly showcasing that, hey, all the revenue that we're currently seeing is really coming from this bucket of published videos, but we already spent 15 million on unpublished videos that are about to come out, and they're going to make additional revenue, right? So it's kind of like a way of lingo saying, okay, just because you see this big number and maybe you're looking at the revenue number and the revenue number is not there, guess what? There's still plenty of content coming our way. And that kind of like starts leading us into the whole conversation of, okay, how are they also funding this, right? We spoke a little bit about the brand deals, and what was cool to see is kind of like the volume that they're currently doing in the brand deals. This is kind of like the growth, that crazy growth that MrBeast experienced. And for 2024, their target was to hit almost 90 million in brand deals, brand partnerships. And at the creation of that deck, as you can see, 90% of those deals were already signed with some of these customers, which is kind of crazy. And we're going to talk about the specific numbers for some of these customers because we also have access to that data now. But if you look at kind of like the breakdown and their forecasts and how they've been performing, so per video, MrBeast charges 1.7 in the past, targeting 2.5 in 2024, which they roughly hit on average per video, which is kind of crazy. So anytime you see that video show up, right, like a lot of the brand deal partnerships, especially if you're on a small side as a creator, like if you make anywhere north of, like, I would say like 25, 30, 40, once you enter like 50K per video, like you're doing really well as a creator. And at MrBeast, at their scale, 2.5 is their starting point, right? That's the target, kind of like where they want to be, which is kind of crazy. And as I said, some of the other kind of like metrics are also interesting in terms of like how many videos they want to have out there. But again, we're going to kind of like come back to some of those things because there's some interesting top line items that I want to save for future video. But this is kind of like the number that really stood out to me. And now that kind of like leads me to saying, okay, if those are the people who are paying, like, how does this even come across, right? Like, are these individual deals? Is it like one-off deal? Is there something else? Like, who's paying the most? And we have that all, which is thanks again to this ongoing lawsuit and the submitted files. So these are the contracted amounts. Again, what the final end result happen could differ, right? And what the numbers are this year could differ. But this to me is astonishing numbers, right? $15 million. So this is, we'll get back to Shopify, but $15 million is crazy amount of money that T-Mobile essentially shelled out, which I was like, when I saw the T-Mobile ads, I didn't realize like this is the amount of money we're talking about when it comes to the content and the amount of content, right? So it's for the 4 main channel videos. This is how much they're paying, which again shows maybe also how much I know about operating at that scale. And it's not obviously applicable. It's like very unique world that we're looking at, which not every creator can recreate, but the art of possible, right? Like when you look at something like this and you see the Shopify, like, and how much they're spending, right, on MrBeast videos. So 6 videos. So what puts them at almost 5 million per video that they're spending, right? Specifically for MrBeast content, which is kind of crazy amounts that you see over here. And that just was what was contracted. And then you also can look and see, hey, what are some of the deals that they're working on? And SoFi ended up being sponsored, right? So I don't know if it ended up being at 10 million or something different, but I've seen SoFi as a sponsor. And as you can see, some of the other brands, including Nike, that they were trying to figure out a deal for potentially $20 million. But it was a very early discussion. And I don't recall if any of the MrBeast videos was sponsored by Nike, but it's kind of crazy to me in terms of, again, the volumes that we're dealing with. It's very unique. It's not going to be for every creator, but it just gives you the idea that at that level, when you start playing that game, numbers start getting real. So, and finally, there's another layer to all of these conversations, and what I call it's kind of like partnerships. And this was very interesting to me because I don't know if you've never been on my channel. I was always a big fan of Spotter, especially Spotter Studio, right? I've made content about it. Yes, I was in the partner program as well, but I never made $1. I primarily just leveraged it for the access and just being able to kind of like work and consulting them and kind of like advising them on their product side was super fun for a couple of years. So again, fan of the company, but obviously they went through kind of like a very rough patch in the past year or so, right? And I made an entire video about it. But it kind of like gives me now a clue in terms of what happened on the Spotter side. Because so essentially how to read all of this is that MrBeast has been known that MrBeast is one of their main customers, right? And so if you're not familiar with Spotter, what Spotter does is that they pay you money up front for their licensing fee, for essential licensing of your back catalog. So in this case, what Spotter did, which is, again, the numbers are astonishing, they paid almost 70 million for the access to 29 already published videos, with a plan to essentially make about 2.4 million per video, right? Like that's roughly the payout essentially for MrBeast. But it's also, what it means is that Spotter anticipates that they can at least make 2.4 million per video from that back catalog. And as you can see, Spotter owns the YouTube ad revenue for the 5 years after the publishing. So they hope that over the course of the 5 year, they hopefully make that 2.4 and even more. But out of the 14 videos that are already out there and done, so essentially 15 videos were still yet to be published, Spotter only made so far 9 million. So they made basically what? I think there was a rate. Yeah, there was a rate over here. Right, the updated estimated rate that they're only going to make about 1.9 million per video, which is a pretty big gap, right? So from the perspective of it's like 500,000 per video gap across, call it 30 videos, it's about 6 million gap, right? And it's also, I think, the pace what matters, right? So if you about half of your catalog is already out there and you only about made 9 million, what I anticipate is that this is what started to impact Spotter and what resulted in Spotter layoffs, and then potentially making a decision also to sunset the public version of their Spotter Studio, because you essentially have a double whammy, right? You have a Spotter Studio that's out there as a SaaS tool. If you're not familiar, it was essentially ideation tool, which was pretty cool. I really enjoyed it. I used it all the time to kind of like ideate on the title, thumbnail, and packaging of your videos. That tool, I'm sure, was very expensive to manage, and they probably did not see the subscriber growth that they anticipated, so it probably was burning them cash. And at the same time, on the cash side, from the inflow perspective, the inflow wasn't as high as they anticipated from this deal alone, which can impact, like, once you start looking at the runway, you can start essentially assuming like, oh my god, it's like, we're not going to make the payroll at this pace, so we have to go and cut a bunch of employees and sunset the program around the studio and just have like a skeleton crew to just manage it for some of the internal customers who kind of like have as some of those more dedicated kind of like creators who've been working on a recurring basis, but shut down everything else and shut down the public access so we don't burn too many tokens using AI products that are embedded within that tool. So this was kind of like a clue for me. It's like, okay, now I see what happened from the revenue perspective, right? And I'm sure they've seen this decrease in ad revenue and monetization, not only on MrBeast, it's just the biggest impact, but we probably have seen it across other creators as well, right? And especially in economic environment right now, as much as it's tough call. It probably was the right call for the company to maintain it afloat, because this is where it was kind of like heading, right, for them. And the other interesting partnership on the more positive side was, of course, the Amazon partnership. And this kind of like gives you the idea of how much they were investing and how much they spent on the project, right? So essentially, it was $100 million season that they've produced first season, and it's the same, probably the same budget, if not more, that they spent on the second season of the MrBeast games. And it's also interesting, what I found is that it essentially was originally a 3-year deal with non-exclusive rights, and Amazon had the renewal option for 2 seasons at a time, which hypothetically, considering the fact that they're right now working on the production of the 3rd season, means that the 4th season is a guarantee and a lock. But also, it was at a 2024 level, and depending on the performance and depending on how well Amazon perceived this project to go, which hopefully means it's going pretty well for them, that they renewed it, could be that they only renewed for 1 season, because you can always renegotiate. Like contracts, within the contract, once you sign it, yes, it's very tough to renegotiate the terms. But in between the contracts as they renew, even if you ask them to say you always have to renew 2 seasons at a time, company can still go and come back and offer you something else and point at maybe performance and maybe somewhere it was short of what they expected, and use that as a way to renegotiate the deal. A lot of interesting information out of this deck. And as I said, it's only like about 20 slides out of 200, right? So we're only scratching the surface. We only look at about 10%. So I definitely want to do a couple of other additional deep dives, one especially on the Feastables and their performance and what they're looking at. But also there's some interesting mentions of other things that they're doing. Maybe we'll see if I think that there's like strong enough of an interesting concept to talk about. They also share a lot about how much they spend on their employees, how their stock options work, what they use the money when they raise the funds. There's a lot of interesting information in that content, and you can always check it out. Again, it's in the public domain. You can go out there, you can read it as well. It just takes a second, because it's like 50 pages worth of documents that you have to scroll through slowly to find the right ones. And there are also a lot of decks and the board decks from the both parties that are being sued. So some of the information is very just like interesting, probably for someone in the legal space, not as interesting for someone on the ops and the business side. So there was some content that I was like, yeah, that's not as useful or interesting to talk about. But again, this is one of those interesting situations where the negative situation around the whole MrBeast burger gives us something positive to look at from the perspective of actual education towards the future, right? Like for me, that's interesting to see, because you get a glimpse in terms of both how the creative business at this scale works, but also I start noticing a lot of similarities to what I've seen when you work with like, more mature corporations. Startups probably not going to have as much of content, not going to have like a 200 slide deck, but from the perspective of the company that MrBeast is operating at, like it totally makes sense, especially with Feastables, with the view stats, with some of the other businesses that they have, and now these partnerships. It's now a very mature business that they're running over there. So, right, there are a lot of, so to speak, corporate style executives who work and talk in this manner, because this is how the people who they go and pitch to, right, whether it's from the investment perspective, from the business opportunity perspective, those people speak this language. So it only makes sense for them to kind of like start adopting some of these methodologies. So yeah, I hope you found it interesting. As I said, there's plenty more of other data points. I'll save them for the next video. For now, it's just fascinating to me to see the scale of where MrBeast is at. Where MrBeast is at today. I don't know. Grandma's leaving me. It was a long day. I'll see you next Saturday. Peace.